I can remember back in 2001, we were spending our first Christmas with Colson. So he's 3.5, only been with us for about 6 months. And he was obsessed with buttons. Like the airplane ride back from Russia, he kept pushing the flight attendant button. And we're like, stop, because it was on the seat, not on the... So we're like, just ignore it if you can. I'm sorry. But for Christmas, we got him this toddler car where you push down the button on the top and it zooms across the floor. So all you had to do, press the button, zoom across the floor it goes. And he pressed it over and over and over and over again, and then some. He pressed the button and watched this car go zoom for almost an hour straight until it died. The batteries didn't die, the motor died. The shortest life of a toy I had ever known, because he pressed the buttons over and over and over and over again. And I think about that, and it's such a cute story, but translate that to real life. Our objects are the only thing that get broken by having buttons pressed, right? We as humans often experience brokenness due to life pushing our buttons, due to circumstances pushing our buttons, or quite honestly, other people pushing our buttons. And we're going to talk a little bit about that today. And maybe it's a little brokenness that sometimes can lead into bigger brokenness if we don't deal with it, right? Maybe that brokenness in particular led to some emotional, mental, spiritual, or even physical meltdowns or depletion. Okay, a broken heart can lead to a broken person. Malcolm Muggeridge, he was a Christian journalist in Britain many, many years ago, and he quoted this. He said, "The biggest disease today is not leprosy or tuberculosis, but rather the feeling of being unwanted, uncared for, and deserted by everybody. The greatest evil is lack of love and charity, that terrible indifference toward one's neighbor who lives at the roadside, assaulted by exploitation, corruption, poverty, and disease." So herein lies the issue of this quote. It's not the state of the broken person per se, it's the way in which a broken person is treated. Okay, so today we're looking at the sign miracle where Jesus healed such a broken individual, an invalid at the pool of Bethesda. And the main thing we're going to focus on today is how Jesus treated him and what we can learn from that. So before we go any further, let's read the story, the sign that John writes about in chapter 5, starting verse 1. "After this, there was a feast of the Jews, and Jesus went up to Jerusalem. There is in Jerusalem by the sheep gate a pool, in Aramaic called Bethesda, which has 5 roofed colonnades. In these lay a multitude of invalids, blind, lame, and paralyzed. One man was there who had been an invalid for 38 years. When Jesus saw him lying there, he knew that he had already been there a long time, and he said to him, 'Do you want to be healed?' The sick man answered him, 'Sir, I have no one to put me in the pool when the water is stirred up, and while I'm going, another steps down before me.' Jesus said to him, 'Get up, take up your bed, and walk.' And at once the man was healed, and he took up his bed, and he walked. Now that day was the Sabbath. So the Jews said to the man who had been healed, 'It is the Sabbath, and it is not lawful for you to take up your bed.' But he answered them, 'The man who healed me, that man said to me, take up your bed and walk.' They asked him, 'Who is the man who said to you, take up your bed and walk?' Now the man who had been healed did not know who it was, for Jesus had withdrawn, as there was a crowd in the place. Afterward, Jesus found him in the temple and said to him, 'See, you are all well, sin no more, that nothing worse may happen to you.' The man went away and told the Jews that it was Jesus who had healed him. And this was why the Jews were persecuting Jesus, because he was doing these things on the Sabbath. But Jesus answered them, 'My Father is working until now, and I am working.'" Okay, so before I dive into the points in the outline, I want to explain a few things here that are really important. The pool of the Bethesda was about 2 to 3 feet deep, and was large, rectangular. They say that there's 2 of them that have a middle porch in the middle. It has 5 porches that were colonnades, that were covered porches, that were allowed shade for the sick when they gathered there, because it will get hot in Jerusalem during seasons. The name of the pool, Bethesda, is Aramaic, and it means house of mercy. But a lot of scholars write that it was more of a house of misery, because the pool of Bethesda was where they stuck sick people or allowed them to congregate. In ancient cultures, they did an absolute lousy job of caring for the sick. Jesus is the one that ushered in a new way of approaching the poor and desolate and the outcasts. And this was the first public appearance that he made to a poor, desolate person, of many miracles that he did. So these people in the pool of Bethesda were isolated. They were shelved by families, loved ones, or friends, so to speak, as useless, no longer able to contribute in any way to society. People would walk by them, ignore them, mock them. It was a place where they felt more comfortable in their dysfunction with each other, but they could commiserate with each other as well. But quite frankly, the goal was to keep them out of society. And on a normal day during the year, there would be about 100 people surrounding this pool, waiting for it to bubble up. Okay, so the next thing, I don't know if you've noticed on your outline, but there's no verse 4. It goes from verse 3 to verse 5. Most modern translations eliminate verse 4. And let me explain why. Verse 4 reads this: "For an angel went down at a certain time into the pool and stirred up the water. Then whoever stepped in first after the stirring of the water was made well of whatever disease he had." Okay, so what is believed to have happened is that a scribe at one point added this verse simply to explain to the reader and describe to the reader what the people at that time believed was stirring the water and causing the healing. Because most ancient manuscripts don't say the angel stirred the water. Okay, so instead of an angel, there are other options. So this verse was taken out because there was no proof that it was an angel, just what it is believed that the people believed was happening at that time. Okay, so that led to what is the controversy, so to speak, of, well, how did they get healed? What did that look like? So I'm going to offer a couple of options and tell you what I personally believe based on what I studied. But instead of an angel, it's also believed that the moving of the water could have been due to some subterranean spring that fed the pool that caused the water to bubble every now and then, or even a hot spring. When this would happen, minerals such as sulfur, calcium, potassium, magnesium, zinc, and more would be stirred up and brought to the shallow pool, curing ailments upon contact. Yet others believed that it was pagan gods because the stirring and healing which the sick were calling on were pagan gods. So they felt the pagan gods were answering their call. Here's what I believe. I don't believe it was an angel stirring up the water, because the God I know would not make a bunch of blind, lame, paralyzed people desperately attempt to race to a pool for a chance to be healed. I don't see God doing that. And so that's why a lot of scholars say, yeah, I just don't, we're taking this out because it wasn't an original. Some scribe added it for explanation, but not for the reality of what was happening. Okay. I believe it did have more to do with the natural minerals that modern medicine has proven to have healing qualities, right? Or quite frankly, some say maybe it was a placebo effect along with that. Okay. Our minds are powerful, right? If I'm the first one there, this is going to happen. Some scholars say whatever it was, the pool did not have lasting effects, though. Only temporary relief, as there are no manuscripts to record anything different. Okay? So the point of this is not the healing pool. The point of this is what Jesus does at the pool of Bethesda. Okay? I just thought that was interesting, and I thought it was important to note. if you do read a manuscript that has an angel stir the water, I wouldn't believe that, because is that the kind of God you think is going to say, if you get there first, you're the one that gets my healing, right? Okay. So I will explain a little bit more on some of this later, but a good note of reference to consider. But now, 3 things we learn according to the miracle of at Bethesda. Number 1, Jesus observed the man with compassion. Now remember, this is the first poor, poverty-stricken invalid that Jesus has approached that we know of, okay? And Jesus here is changing the way people should be interacting with these desolate people, okay? So the first thing Jesus did that we can notice was he observed the man with compassion. Read it again. One man was there who had been an invalid for 38 years. When Jesus saw him lying there and knew that he had already been there for a long time, he said to him. So let's stop there. First of all, when it says Jesus saw him, understand that this was much more than a physical expression of his eyes, okay? In Greek, this is translated to discern clearly. So when Jesus discerned him clearly, or another phrase that is supplemented would be attended to. Okay, so it's a much deeper meaning than just a physical seeing of the eyes. In Hebrew, it means to experience. Okay, so it's a much, much deeper than just, oh, he saw him, like he just caught his eye. Because we know that's not just the fact, because when Jesus saw him lying there and knew he had already been there for a long time, scholars say he was on the hunt for this man, knowing what he had been through. Okay, so here's a man who had been broken by circumstance, his physical ailment. I mean, how demoralizing must it have been for a man to not be able to work? It's possible he could have had a wife. He could have been born with this invalid state, but he also could have acquired it a long time. So he could be well over 38 years. So just imagine not being able to do what a man was designed by God to do. He was broken by people being cast out and left alone. He was broken by time, having dealt with this for 38 long years of his life. And as we all know, when we mature and get older, time doesn't always heal all wounds. And for this man, it didn't. Yet Jesus saw him intimately. He saw him as a person, a child of God, not an illness or an invalid. This is a compassion that this man hasn't felt from another human being for over 38 years. And you have to think of the scene and what it would look like with all these broken and sick people. I think we've all driven downtown when a lot of them have been asked to leave the shelters, because most of them are not allowed. The homeless, the poverty-stricken, all of them, they're not allowed to stay at the shelters all day. They have to take to the streets. And there's a smell. I'm sorry, I'm just going to say it. You know what? There's a smell. There's a scene that can be visually disturbing. That's what it looked like at the pool of Bethesda, okay? You also need to know that because this is during a feast in Jerusalem, as verse 1 said, there wouldn't have been just 100 people. There would have probably been about 3,000 people gathering and crowding around the pool of Bethesda, waiting for it to boil up and bubble up and waiting to be the first one in. Out of all of these people, Jesus chooses this man. He wasn't about to conduct this healing crusade, which he could have easily done. He could have easily spoke and every single person there would have been healed. That would have been amazing, right? But I'm going to discuss why he didn't in a moment. But all of it, Jesus chooses this one man, zeroes in on this one man. Like there's no one else around the pool. Like there's no one else that is in need. Like he sees no one else but this man. He didn't he didn't discern clearly anybody else but this man, okay? He was arguably the most desperate man at the pool, the one who had no one, because that's what he says, no ability to help himself. And then the saying that God helps those who help themselves is not in the Bible. And this is a clear statement and testament that God helps those who can't help themselves. That's what Jesus is saying. Because his compassion allowed him to see beyond the brokenness, this man encountered the healing hands of Jesus, okay? The question we have to ask ourselves, when you leave the presence of a family member or a friend or even a stranger that is broken, do they feel seen and heard the way Jesus saw this man? Do we have the eyes of the Holy Spirit to allow us to see, truly see the people around us the way Jesus did? Can we walk into a store or into work and discern the way Jesus did? Or are we so hyper-focused on ourselves and our mission and our project for the day or what we need to do that we aren't observant to the people around us at all? Okay? Remember, it was an obvious brokenness that those gathering by the pool were seen with. Okay, they were obviously physically or mentally broken, but there are a ton of broken people that don't always show clear signs of their pain and suffering. It isn't always noticeable, and if we are not looking to see and discern clearly, we may miss the opportunities to show that compassion the way Jesus did and model after him. A few months ago, when my car was in the shop getting fixed from a little incident that I had, yes, I hit Dave's truck. I was dropped off by the car place at the car rental to get a rental car until mine was done. And I walked in to hear the manager being cussed out by this older couple, like just F-bomb, this, that, blaming. It was really nasty. It was ugly. And I watched her deal with this couple with such grace and compassion. And not once did she raise her voice back. She only kept serving them with kindness. Why? Because I think she saw their frustration as an older couple not realizing what it took that you had to have to rent a car. You have to have a credit card to rent the car, right? So I kind of may twist this, but they were broken in their knowledge, right? In their understanding. And she realized that. And she saw that frustration and she did everything she could to attend to, see them, attend to, serve them, okay? When this manager was done with this unruly couple and I was next to get her help, and she's pulling up my info, and I just felt the need to say, man, I totally saw what you did and how you treated that couple. You are a rock star. They had such aggression and disrespect. And she said, you know, it happens more often than you think, customer service, right? I told her that her level of professionalism was not unnoticed and that she would get a raving review from me to her bosses. Now, she responded with a little bit of a tear in her eye saying, thank you, no one's ever told me that before. To close the story though, this couple about 20 minutes later came back in and apologized. And I found out when I went to turn in my car that she had gotten a raise and a promotion. So there's this trifecta, you know, this effect, the domino effect of showing compassion. Because she did that, I did that, and then her work did that, and it was just this beautiful story of it matters to go beyond what we think we see to what is really happening and discerning clearly. Okay, it doesn't have to be a big moment, but there are always moments around us to express compassion, to tell someone that we see them. But Jesus didn't stop there, because number 2, Jesus confronted the man with honesty. And I'm going to break this up into 2 ways that he did this. He was honest about his earthly reality. Okay, so first Jesus asked, do you want to be healed? What kind of cruel question does that seem to be to a man who's an invalid for 38 years? I have visited people in the hospital. I visited Judy one time when she was sick. I have never asked, did you really want to get better? That was not something I went in and asked Judy when she was in the hospital. It was, I'm going to pray for you to get better, right? So he asked because he knew that this man had been in this position for a very long time, okay? He had become accustomed to this life. He had become accustomed to begging and collecting handouts. A change in his condition and circumstances now would mean a change in his responsibilities. Okay? This means you will now have to work for a living. Do you want that kind of change in your life? Do you really want a different life? But this wasn't just a challenge to his desire, but an honest challenge to his faith. The same way we saw last week with the nobleman's son. Jesus always takes it that step further, makes it about faith, okay? One scholar said this about that. Jesus knew that not every sick person wants to be healed, and that some are so discouraged that they put away all hope of being healed. Jesus dealt with the man who may had had his heart withered as well as his legs. Jesus therefore attempted to build the man's faith. Okay? The man replies to that question, "Sir, I have no one to put me in the pool when the water is stirred up, and when I am going, another steps in before me." So Jesus asked if he wants to get well, but the man answered, "I have no one." His faith is still in the pool. His faith is not in the man of Jesus. Okay? One scholar said this: the sick man does what we nearly all do. He limits God's help to his own ideas and does not dare promise himself more than he can conceive in his own mind. His mind was stuck on the one-way method, the pool. As if he was afraid to get his hopes up because he had been doing this for so long. But as I've said before, if we're afraid to get our hopes up, our hopes are in the wrong people, place, or thing. Okay? Was it pity, compassion, mercy? Probably all of the above. But what was it that led Jesus to say in verse 8, "Get up, take up your bed and walk"? And at once the man was healed, and he took up his bed and walked. It was probably all of the above, but one thing for sure, the man talks about the pool, and Jesus says in not so many words, "I don't need a pool. My word is all you need. Stop focusing on the pool. Listen to me. Hear what I'm saying." Okay? You don't need the magical stirring of waters. You only need me, is what Jesus was saying. And Jesus says, "Get up," challenging this man. It's now time for you to do your part. You're healed. What are you going to do about that? Recognize that healing and walk in that healing was what get up means. Okay? And that is just what the man did. But we're going to jump forward a little bit. Jesus didn't only limit it to his earthly reality. Letter B, he was honest about his eternal reality. Verse 14 tells us, afterward, Jesus found him in the temple and said to him, "See, you are well. Sin no more, that nothing worse may happen to you." To find something, you have to be looking for it. Scholars say Jesus sought the man out because he was concerned not only for his physical being and healing, but more importantly, his spiritual healing. When Jesus says, "See, you are well," understand that in Greek, this is an indication of a permanent healing. Okay, scholars say that many of the cures reported from the pool did not last long. But what I have done for you is the real deal. That's what it means when he says, "See, you are well." See, meaning, see, you are. A lot of the others are not. Okay? Sin no more, because the eternal reality of possible suffering is nothing compared to what you have endured for 38 years. And when Jesus asked him if he wants to get well, he was asking in the whole sense of his being. And the man responded to that. The man knew that because he responded by going straight to the temple. Okay? It was as if Jesus was waiting to see what he would choose. You have an opportunity in life. What will you choose to do now? Do you really want to be well? Now you've got to show it. Okay? Don't we all have a new opportunity every day? We wake up to a new opportunity every day we open our eyes. But do we look at every day with the eyes of eternity? Do we look at them and people around us with the finite earth in mind or with the eternal in mind? If that is how Jesus decides to view people and speak honestly to them about that, shouldn't we practice doing the same? Be less afraid to speak truth with grace. Jesus modeled how we should be treating everyone in our life an opportunity to speak the truth about their eternal salvation. How often do we wait for someone else to do that? Or how often do we just don't want to offend? I'm talking to myself here. I'm not pointing fingers at anybody. How often do we think, well, they've heard it before? And there's timing. I know that. But we have to have the mindset to see the opportunity in order to engage in the opportunity. So it's got to be a mindset, a constant mindset. But in doing so, this passage teaches one other thing we can learn from Jesus. Number 3, not every person wants to be well. Verse 13, now the man who had been healed did not know who it was, for Jesus had withdrawn, as there was a crowd in the place. So if Jesus read the heart of man that he healed, the heart of the man he healed, it's very likely he did know the hearts of all of those around him. We can make that assumption. But in the midst of the crowd, he withdrew. It isn't that the other people around him, maybe not all of them didn't want to be healed, but some of them had grown accustomed. But I think what we're referring to here most is the leaders who thought they knew Jesus best had no desire to truly meet the Messiah. Because remember, these Jewish leaders that we're going to read about in a minute grew up with Jesus. They knew him, okay? So therein lies the problem that we're going to go into. Now that day was the Sabbath, so the Jews said to the man who had been healed, it is the Sabbath and is not lawful for you to take up your bed. But he answered them, the man who healed me, that man said to me, take up your bed and walk. The Jewish leaders didn't want to know who healed the crippled man. They wanted to know who told him to carry that bed mat on the Sabbath. That was their first question. Who told you that you can operate outside of our power and instruction? Who told you to go against us? These Jewish leaders didn't want to be healed from the weight of the burden of law that they had created themselves. Quite honestly, because they made those laws. So you go back to the original Sabbath. God says in the Old Testament, it is unlawful to do customary work, which is forbidden on the Sabbath. So if I were to say customary work, what do you think I'm referring to? Point blank, customary work. The Jews found this very unspecific and saw it fit to add some addendums. So let me give you a few of those, okay? Can't look in the mirror on the Sabbath. Because if you did, you might be compelled to work on your appearance. You can't put your false teeth in on the Sabbath. Truth. Because they weighed more than the allotted weight for you to lift on the Sabbath. If I remember right, it became Jewish law that you couldn't lift, by the Jews, not by God, you couldn't lift anything that weighed more than 2 dried fig leaves. That's not very much. And I don't think that would be a very heavy burden to carry, right? I even read that going to the bathroom would have been work if you had to dig the hole, which in the Old Testament you had to do. So you had to hold it during the Sabbath. No joke. So the Jews took this to such a degree, and the reason they did that was to have control, to have power. But this isn't just in the Old Testament, guys. This is carried on to this day and time. Because I found this, one scholar wrote this. This devotion to the rabbi's interpretation of the Sabbath law continues in modern times. An example is found in April 1992, a news article. Tenants let 3 apartments in an Orthodox neighborhood in Israel burn to the ground while they asked a rabbi whether a telephone call to the fire department on the Sabbath would violate Jewish law. Observant Jews are forbidden to use the phone on the Sabbath because doing so would break an electrical current, which is considered a form of work. In the half hour it took the rabbi to decide, yes, the fire spread to 2 neighboring apartments. Even today, there are God-believing people that don't want to accept the freedom that Jesus offers. The freedom from the heavy burden of rules and regulations to be pure. God's instructions to not do customary work was referring to work that you do that produces something that you gain in order to care for yourself. End of story. So what is broken here is a pharisaical, how do you say that? Pharisaical interpretation of one of God's law. So a blessing meant to increase faith only increased the blindness of those who refuse to acknowledge the blessing of the healing. Jesus loves the broken, but those who can't admit that they are broken will miss out on the healing characteristics of a Savior. This is all because the man picked up his mat, which is interesting because it would have been allowed for him to do that in his own home, but not in public. Why? Because the Jews can't see it in their own home, so they can't make that a law because they can't call him out on it. It was only in public so that they could have something to condemn. Last week, I tried to quote from Oswald Chambers, but I didn't get it quite right. The quote is actually, unguarded strength is a double weakness. So in other words, confidence in our position, our authority, our strengths, our gifts can lead to a brokenness and weakness like no other. It keeps us blind to truth, blind to the reality of our limitations, blind to what God would desire to do in our lives. The religious leaders were broken by their unguarded strength. They needed a different kind of brokenness. Psalm 51:17, my sacrifice, O God, is a broken spirit, a broken and contrite heart. You, God, will not despise. The Jews that were against Jesus, this miracle itself was what began the really harsh persecution of going after Jesus. Jesus withdrew because he knew he was going to make the Jews mad, right? Jesus knew that there was a broken people that didn't know they were broken and didn't want to recognize they were broken. And he realized there's nothing I can do for you if we don't accept and admit and recognize that brokenness. It's a very overarching reality for the Pharisees, obviously. But we all can easily walk in our own confidence, in our own daily routine. We can all walk in such a strength of mind that we stop realizing that we can be broken at any moment and still constantly need the saving grace of a healing Jesus. So that's when I say not everyone wants to be healed, it's Jews were an example of that, but we need to have that open, broken, contrite heart, a humility of knowing that we at any point need the saving grace of the healing Jesus. And what Jesus has proven more than any with the brokenness of the Jews and how he withdrew from them was love has consequences. Jesus came to love, but was rejected by some. Yet he still took the risk for all who would accept him. And it's important that we follow that way of Jesus. I don't know who wrote this, but here's a quote. Actually, I do. It's Louise Erdrich in a book called The Painted Drum. But it said, life will break you. Nobody can protect you from that. And living alone won't either, for solitude will also break you with its yearning. You have to love. You have to feel. It is the reason you are here on earth. You are here to risk your heart. After all, that's what Jesus did. Take the risk to love the broken around you. And take Jesus as the model and know when it's not accepted, it's okay to wipe the dust off your shoes, as Paul did. They didn't want to hear it. I can walk away. It's okay. Withdraw and pray from a distance. We can't save everyone, but we can offer love and support and encouragement to those that are broken and recognize their brokenness. And how can we do that better than to be like Jesus and what he did and how he did it?